Hi everyone, my name's Josh. I'm the historian here at the Hayes Presidential, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about the structure and the setting here at Spiegel Grove, specifically the beautiful Hayes home behind us, which sits on this 25 acres. It is a country house, and in the mid-19th century, so the Victorian era, about the 1850s, there were three prominent architects that really influenced the country house. So one, the father of the country house being Alexander Jackson Davis, who is also really the father of the Gothic Revival style, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Secondly, you have Andrew Jackson Downing, and he was a landscape architect who also brought back the Gothic Revival, or really helped to, I guess, push the Gothic Revival, you could say, in the time. And he really believed in sort of a harmonious feeling between the buildings and the grounds. So for instance, the gable of the house we see here behind us, if this were a Jackson Downing property, you would have had sort of like pine trees to sort of go in a point along with the roof so that it feels sort of harmonious. Also, Andrew Jackson Downing believed that the route leading up to the house through the ground should be sort of meandering so that you wouldn't go straight to the house, you would kind of curve up to it so you get to a feeling of the grounds and sort of the beauty of the trees and everything as you come up to where you live. The third architect is Frank Jessup Scott, and he was interesting because he believed that the landscape plots that you would have for flowers and that, the flower beds, should almost be like paintings, and that you should have different colors that sort of complement each other like a picture would, like on the ground though. He also believed that country houses were sort of the ideal living situations in the Victorian era because a lot of Victorians believed that cities weren't the proper places to live. They were crowded, they were dirty, sort of considered insalubrious, and they were also full of crime. And so he believed that you should have access to the city, but you also shouldn't live way out in the middle of nowhere, sort of in the woods, because you wouldn't have contact with the civilization. So the country house was kind of the happy middle, where you'd have a lovely house on grounds that was close to the city, but you'd be able to get away from the city when you come home from work and enjoy the plot. So really the contemporary American suburb where you have a house on a plot of land sort of near town but not in town is kind of Frank Jessup Scott's real dream. Now we'd like to talk a little bit about the house itself, specifically its style, but give a little detail first about the construction. So the original part of this house is the left-hand portion that we see here, and it was built by Sardis Burchard, so Rutherford's maternal uncle, essentially his surrogate father, who was his caregiver. And he built this to be a summer home for Rutherford and Rutherford's wife Lucy when they were living down in Cincinnati. And so Sardis started building this in 1859 to 1863. It took 4 years because of labor shortage during the Civil War and supply shortage. The design was done by Sardis, Robert McClellan, and it was also partly influenced by Rutherford, who was giving his input as the house was being built and designed. The house itself, the construction started August 22nd, 1859. A few interesting aspects of this. First of all, it's 60 feet long, 40 feet wide, the original portion, and it was only 2.5 stories tall. There are two additions that were added on. The right-hand portion there in the 1880s, 1880, 1881 specifically, and in the back, 1889, and we'll be seeing that portion in a little while here. So the house itself is Gothic Revival in style. So the Gothic Revival was really popular in the 1840s and 1850s, and what it was this harkening back to sort of the medieval period and that medieval Gothic architecture. Now, Sardis was a little bit, how should I say, a little cheap in his planning of what the detail would be, and he didn't want to add too much decorative detail, and so what he did is he added just a little bit over the top of the window here. You can see that there is a little area called a drip mold above the three-part window just under the gable itself. And that is the only hint of Gothic Revival that you can see on the house at all. The 1880 portion, they also did a little Gothic Revival drip mold to sort of tie it all together. The house itself, as far as the brick that it's made from, now it's interesting because in this time railroads were really starting to connect the U.S. And so what this is called is a post-railroad construction, meaning that materials that were used to build the house were actually coming from all over the country. So before the railroads were connecting everywhere, you had to use materials that were coming locally, so stone, wood, etc. So whatever you had at hand is what you built your house from. But later on, they were able to build houses from materials coming from all across the country. One other interesting note about the Gothic Revival style in particular is that architects had different feelings and different intentions for different styles. So first of all, the Gothic Revival, they thought it was more suited for maybe scholars or the clergy, whereas the Italianate design was maybe more for businessmen. So it's interesting to think of Uncle Sardis thinking of Rutherford as a scholar. Rutherford himself was definitely not a religious man in the sense that he didn't subscribe to any denomination or any orthodoxy. But it is interesting to think about Sardis thinking of his nephew as a very intelligent and scholarly person. All right, now we're focusing on the second section of the house here, so the section to the right of the original structure, and this is again the 1880-1881 wing. And a couple of interesting things to note here, the main thing being the veranda that we're seeing. So the veranda used to stretch around three sides of the original structure, and when Rutherford wanted to add this addition on, he wanted to expand the veranda. He loved the veranda on this house. He used to say that he wished he had a veranda with a house attached to it, so he would spend so much time on this. Incidentally, it takes 33 laps to make a mile, and when Rutherford was looking to get some exercise when it was all snowy out here in Spiegel Grove, he used to just pace back and forth on the veranda, which is kind of funny, interesting to think about seeing him do that. But the veranda specifically was much more sparse in its decoration originally on the original part of the house. And so after it was expanded, most likely these Eastlake touches were put on. And so when I talk about Eastlake, what I'm referring to is a style created by Charles Eastlake, who was an English architect and furniture designer. That style becomes really popular in the United States about 1870 to 1900, and it's really seen through clashing wallpaper patterns and also incised lines on blocky patterns of furniture or woodwork, like we're seeing at the center portions of the sections of the veranda, where you have almost this kind of like floral little arching here springing up from these centerpieces. A couple other architectural aspects of the veranda itself. So you see there are a couple of angled boards that are going on either side of the veranda openings here. Those are called spandrels. And up above, there's a little running line here of blocks. Those are called modillions. So the veranda has been changed over time. It didn't always have this lattice work here that you see. It used to just be the brick, and it probably wasn't painted. Also, the stone that you see with the railing there in Rutherford and Lucy's time had what was called cheek molding, so it was wood, and it sort of gradually moved down. It was kind of a sloping look to that. And finally, we believe that all of the veranda itself actually was at one point varnished, so it wouldn't have been painted. It would have been like a natural varnish over the wood itself. When Rutherford inherited the house upon the death of Sardis in 1874, he, his son Rutherford Platt, and a groundskeeper cleared about 2.5 acres around Spiegel Grove here so that they could plant fruit trees and flowers and have gardens, etc. He also had built in 1874 a stick-built structure, which is a wooden structure, of a dining room and a kitchen onto the original part of the house here. But later on, that was torn off, and the 1889 wing was added on, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But the main focus I want to talk about from this section is this bay window bump out that we see here, which actually expands the living space in Rutherford and Lucy's bedroom on the first floor, and also Fanny's bedroom up on the second floor. We have a great picture of Rutherford and Lucy standing in one of these windows together on the first floor bump out, which is sort of charming. And finally, here we are at the back of the Hayes home. This whole section is what I mentioned earlier, added on in 1889 when Rutherford and Lucy wanted a sort of larger area, larger dining room that they could entertain in. So there are a few aspects of this section which is interesting. First of all, this is Queen Anne style. Queen Anne is the really popular architectural style between about 1880 and 1910, and usually it features all sorts of different architectural elements kind of mishmashed together. A couple of things to note here, though. one way you can tell this is Queen Anne, if you look above here, this section under the gable with the paired windows, very indicative of Queen Anne. Also, the windows here, the trio to my right, and then on the left here, these paired windows with these Syrian arches, which were really popular in a late Victorian style called Richardsonian Romanesque, which was very popular in a lot of courthouse buildings, little public or large public buildings that you see, courthouses, etc., in downtowns. This used to be an open porch too, these two windows, and were actually filled in later. This whole section was enclosed, and a little breakfast room exists behind that. There was also a staircase that used to come down here that would lead up to that porch that was very similar to the verandan style with the cheek molding on the side, so that sort of swooping that would flank either side of the stairs. A couple other things to mention here. On this corner you can see that there's what's called an oculus, so a little round window area, and that would have had stained glass. Red flash glass and also yellow glass, and that was used, we believe, as a dark room. That section off the closet, there was a closet there off Fanny's bathroom, and so we're still doing some more research on that. But speaking of stained glass, you're going to see other portions of stained glass if you go around the exterior of the house, and that stained glass in domestic homes is again indicative of that Eastlake, which is again hearkening back to Gothic revival, because the Eastlake philosophy was that things should be more hand-built rather than machine-made. And so what Charles Eastlake was doing was, again, looking back at these craftsmen around that period of the medieval era when things were really hand-built, and he was modeling his designs off of that. And one of the last features, like the stained glass, that really ties together this whole Gothic theme of this house is this turret at the back here, which pops out from one of the bedrooms, and it's sort of rounded shape with this conical top, again reminiscent of this Gothic architecture. And then we have at the very top a spire, which is almost reminiscent of a church spire.